"I'll make you CEO if you close the deal with the Arabs." The millionaire's laughter roared across the golden boardroom. Chandeliers sparkled above, investors watched in silence, and the poor maid stood frozen near the table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She lowered her gaze, her face burning, but said nothing. He mocked her to buy time, pretending it was just a cruel joke, while everyone else smirked at her humiliation. No one knew the translator was missing for a reason, nor that the cleaning lady carried a secret heavier than anyone could imagine. What began as a display of arrogance inside a Manhattan skyscraper would soon twist into a revelation so shocking it would silence the powerful millionaire before the entire room. The golden chandeliers flickered above the long table, throwing light across polished marble floors and tall velvet curtains. The air in the boardroom was thick with expectation. The Arab investors sat in perfect composure, their eyes calm yet sharp, their hands resting lightly on the table as if time itself waited for their approval. Every tick of the antique clock on the wall seemed louder than the last. At the head of the table sat Richard Kane, the millionaire CEO whose reputation filled skyscrapers and business magazines. But tonight, his charm seemed strained, his smile stretched too wide, his laugh a little too loud. His translator, the one man he depended on to turn this meeting into a historic contract, was nowhere to be seen. Richard checked his watch, adjusted his cufflinks, and forced another grin, as though the delay were nothing more than a calculated pause. In truth, he was buying time. The silence from the Arab guests was heavy. They exchanged brief glances, murmuring under their breath in Arabic, their voices soft and deliberate. Richard nodded impatiently, pretending he understood, his hand tapping on the documents laid before him. His empire depended on this deal, and yet he was trapped by language. In the corner of the room, almost invisible, stood the maid. Emily had been cleaning in the adjacent hall when she was ordered to stay, in case anything needed tidying. She clasped her hands in front of her apron, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the floor. But every word spoken in Arabic reached her with clarity. She understood it all, still she remained silent, her chest rising and falling with the weight of secrets no one knew she carried. Richard leaned back in his chair, pulling at his silver beard as if amused, though his eyes betrayed unease. To the investors he projected arrogance, to himself he whispered fear. He glanced toward Emily again, not to see her, but to use her presence as a shield for his delay. He cracked another joke at her expense, drawing chuckles from the American associates lining the side of the room. Emily's cheeks flushed, though she kept her eyes lowered. She remembered another man's laughter, warm, not cruel. Her late husband, Youssef, whose language had become hers in whispered conversations long after midnight, in promises, in dreams that once seemed unbreakable. The same Arabic now filling this room had once filled her home with love. Now it cut her heart like glass. The investors leaned closer to one another, their whispers turning sharper, a note of satisfaction in their tone. They were not simply discussing figures, they were plotting, certain their private words were safe. Richard's delay had handed them the advantage. The missing translator, Emily realized, was no accident. Richard forced a booming laugh, lifting his glass of water as though to toast his own confidence. Yet his hand trembled slightly, betraying the facade. Emily saw it, and so did the men across the table. Power was slipping, and still she stood, silent, torn between invisibility and revelation. The chandelier's light shimmered in her eyes as she finally looked up. If you are already feeling the tension in these first minutes, tell us in the comments from which city you're watching, and don't forget to leave your like. The murmur of Arabic voices grew louder, threading through the silence like smoke. Their tone was calm, almost casual, but Emily knew better. Each phrase was a blade hidden in silk. The investors weren't just stalling, they were crafting a trap, one Richard Kane was too blind to see. Richard shifted in his chair, his smile faltering. "Gentlemen," he said, spreading his hands across the table as if command still belonged to him, "let's not waste time. We're all here for the same thing." His words echoed emptily, unanswered. The investors kept their conversation in their own tongue, deliberately ignoring him. The CEO's jaw tightened. He tapped his pen on the contract, harder with every beat, until the sound was sharp enough to echo against the walls. "Where the hell is my translator?" he muttered under his breath, but loud enough for his associates to hear. One of them shrugged helplessly. Another cleared his throat, avoiding his eyes. The absence was too strange, too deliberate. Emily felt her pulse quicken. She could hear every word, every mocking plan unfolding. The investors were negotiating with one another, not with Richard. They were amused by his desperation, by the arrogance that blinded him, and beneath it all, they whispered of an agreement already sealed, with the translator himself. A betrayal dressed as professionalism. Her fingers curled into the fabric of her apron. She wanted to speak, to shatter the arrogance in the room with the truth burning on her tongue. But fear rooted her to the floor. She was just a maid, hired to wipe fingerprints from glass and sweep crumbs from the carpet. If she spoke now, what would they say? Who would believe her? Richard forced a laugh that rang hollow, snapping the tension like brittle glass. "Gentlemen," he said again, this time louder, "let's cut to the chase. I don't need a translator to know we're all businessmen here." His words carried false confidence, but sweat dotted his brow. He raised his glass again, his hand unsteady. "We all want profit. Money speaks louder than language." The investors looked at one another, then one leaned forward, his lips curling into a faint smile. He spoke slowly, in Arabic, as if testing the limits of Richard's ignorance. The others chuckled softly. Richard frowned, pretending not to notice the laughter. He snapped his fingers at one of his aides. "Find that translator, now." The aide hurried out, but Emily knew he would find no one. The betrayal was complete, and the silence of the translator was part of the plan. Richard turned, his frustration finally spilling over. His eyes landed on Emily, standing stiff and quiet at the edge of the room. "What are you staring at?" he barked. "You're here to clean, not to listen." His voice cracked like a whip, and the Americans on his side of the table laughed obediently, hoping to lighten his mood. Emily lowered her gaze again, her heart pounding. She had endured insults before in silence, hiding her knowledge like a wound no one could see. But tonight every word spoken in Arabic was another spark against the fire she carried inside. And the fire was spreading. Richard Kane slammed his palm against the table, rattling the crystal glasses. His smile was gone now, stripped away like cheap paint under rain. "Enough," he barked. "This meeting is wasting my time." His voice echoed off the chandeliers, sharp and brittle. The Arab investors did not flinch. Their eyes remained steady, their composure unshaken. One leaned toward another and spoke in Arabic, his tone low but dripping with amusement. "He has already lost. Let him sweat." The others nodded, their lips curling with satisfaction. Emily felt the words pierce through her chest. They weren't negotiating anymore. They were playing with him, like hunters circling prey already bleeding. She wanted to scream, to tell him the meaning behind those cold glances and soft chuckles, but her tongue pressed against her teeth, locked in silence. Richard's fingers drummed against the contract again, faster now, each tap betraying the rhythm of his panic. He stood suddenly, pushing his chair back with a screech. "You want to play games?" he said, his face flushed. "Fine, but I don't beg for deals." The room tensed. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might walk out, storming from his own boardroom in front of billionaires. But he didn't. He couldn't. The empire he had built on arrogance was trembling, and this contract was the foundation he needed. So he stayed, trapped by his own pride. One of the investors whispered again in Arabic, his eyes sliding toward Emily. "Look at the maid. Even she knows more dignity than him." The table chuckled softly. Richard, oblivious to the words, followed their gaze. And once again he used her. "Gentlemen," he said, forcing a smile, "maybe she should try closing the deal for me." His laughter thundered, cruel and hollow, aimed directly at Emily's bowed head. The Americans at his side laughed with him, clapping their hands like obedient dogs. Emily's cheeks burned, her throat tightened as if ropes had wrapped around it. She kept her eyes on the carpet, her nails digging into her palms. She remembered Youssef's voice, gentle in the same language these men were twisting into daggers. She remembered nights when he would recite poetry, when she would answer shyly, stumbling over syllables until she mastered them. He had died too soon, leaving her with nothing but memories and fluency in a tongue she now carried like a secret blade. Tears pressed behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not cry here. Not in front of Richard Kane. Not in front of these men who saw her as invisible. Richard lifted the contract again, waving it theatrically. Well, do I need to find someone off the street to negotiate for me? Because apparently, none of you gentlemen are ready to sign. His voice cracked, the joke falling flat. The investors leaned back, their silence heavier than words. Emily could hear their whispers still. Mockery, betrayal. The name of the translator who had sold Richard out. The truth clawed at her throat, desperate to escape. And for the first time, Emily's lips parted, just slightly, just enough to draw breath as if words were finally gathering, ready to spill. The weight of silence pressed harder against the room, broken only by the clink of Richard Kane's glass as he set it down with a sharp thud. His jaw was rigid, his smile gone. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, glaring across at the Arab investors who remained maddeningly composed. "You think you can mock me?" he snapped, his voice cutting through the polished air. "Do you have any idea who I am? I don't wait for anyone." His bravado rang hollow, his words bouncing back at him in the golden chamber. The investors exchanged a glance, their lips barely moving as they whispered in Arabic. "Look how he crumbles. He humiliates his own maid just to feel powerful, yet here he is, begging us." Their chuckles were soft, controlled, but to Emily the meaning burned like fire in her chest. Richard turned suddenly, his gaze slicing toward her like a knife. She stiffened, hands clasped tighter in front of her apron. "You!" he barked. "Why are you still standing there like a statue? Do something useful or get out!" The words cracked across the room. His associates laughed nervously, the sound bouncing off the marble walls, eager to please him, to make his cruelty acceptable. Emily's throat tightened. She lowered her gaze, but inside something shifted. Richard smirked, feeding on his own display of power. "Don't think for a second I couldn't replace you in minutes. One wrong move, and you'll be back on the streets where you belong." His tone dripped with disdain, his voice rising enough for the investors to hear. The Arabs murmured again, their eyes lingering on Emily. Even his own people fear him. He will fall tonight. Their words coiled around her, invisible to everyone but her. She pressed her lips together, fighting the tremor in her chest. In that moment, memory cut through the haze of humiliation. Youssef's face, his eyes warm as the desert night, came rushing back. She remembered his hand on hers as he whispered in Arabic, "Never lower your voice to injustice. Even silence can be a crime." His words were etched into her soul, words she had buried with him. Until now. Emily inhaled slowly, her lungs filling with air that tasted like defiance. Her eyes lifted, not to Richard, but to the men across the table. One of the Arabs noticed. His smile faltered when he saw her gaze steady, unwavering, meeting his. For the first time, the room shifted. The laughter dulled. A ripple of unease spread across the polished table, unspoken, but felt. Richard followed their line of sight and turned sharply toward her again. "What are you looking at?" he demanded, his voice louder, harsher, his mask of control slipping further with every word. "You think you're part of this meeting? You're nothing. Nothing." Emily did not answer, but her silence was no longer submission. It was the silence before a storm. And in the gleam of the chandelier above, her eyes no longer looked away. Richard Kane's patience shattered like glass. He rose halfway from his chair, his fist slamming onto the table. "Enough of this game!" he shouted, his face flushed, veins straining against his neck. "If you don't take this deal seriously, I'll walk away right now." The words thundered in English, but the Arab investors merely exchanged quiet glances, calm as statues. One of them leaned slightly to the other, whispering in Arabic with the ease of men who held the upper hand. "He is already desperate. Soon he will beg on his knees." Emily heard it. She felt it sink into her bones. Her chest ached with the weight of knowledge no one else in the room understood. Each phrase was a dagger, carving deeper into her silence. Richard adjusted his cufflinks, his movements sharp and impatient. "I am Richard Kane," he barked, as if his name alone could build bridges. "I don't need you. I built my empire from the ground up. Don't test me." Yet even as he spoke, his eyes darted toward the unopened contracts, toward the clock ticking mercilessly on the wall. Time was slipping. So was his empire. The Arabs whispered again, their tones lower, sharper. "He doesn't know his own translator betrayed him. He will sign whatever we wish." Their words were venom, and Emily's heart hammered in her chest. She closed her eyes just for a moment, and the boardroom disappeared. She was back in her small kitchen years ago, Youssef's voice filling the space like music. He had taken her hands in his, guiding her through the syllables, patient, tender. "Your voice matters, Emily," he had told her in Arabic, his eyes glimmering. "One day the world may try to silence you. Don't let it. Promise me." Her lips trembled. She had promised. And here she was, silent, letting cruelty and deceit win. Richard's voice yanked her back into the present. "This meeting is over," he declared, his chair screeching across the marble as he stood. But his body betrayed him. He didn't move toward the door. He lingered, paralyzed between pride and desperation. Billions rested on this moment. Walking away would end him. Staying would break him. Emily's breath shook as she opened her eyes again. The Arabic words still echoed across the table, poisonous and smug. Her hands clenched at her sides. Her lips parted, and without thinking, the first syllables slipped out. Not loud, but enough. A fragment of Arabic, soft as a prayer, escaped her. One of the investors froze. His gaze shifted from Richard to the maid at the edge of the room. His smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes as if he had just seen a ghost whispering in the shadows. Emily lowered her gaze again, her pulse racing. It had been a whisper, a slip. But the silence that followed told her it hadn't gone unnoticed. The boardroom air grew heavier, the golden chandeliers above casting their sharp light on faces tense with unspoken words. One of the Arab investors leaned toward the others, his voice hushed but unmistakable in Arabic. "Did you hear her? The maid. She spoke." The others glanced discreetly toward Emily. She stood near the wall, her hands clasped, her gaze lowered again. But their eyes lingered on her, searching for confirmation. Another leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a test of amusement. He spoke louder now, his tone deliberate in Arabic. "Let's see if the maid listens again. Perhaps she hides more than dust in this place." Emily's breath caught. Every syllable hit her like a drumbeat. Her chest tightened, but she kept her eyes fixed on the floor. Her silence was fragile, breaking apart piece by piece. Richard Kane noticed none of this. His patience was gone, stripped bare. He slammed the contract flat against the table, his knuckles white. "This is ridiculous," he roared. "Where is that damn translator?" His voice cracked with fury. He turned, his eyes latching onto Emily once more, the only target in sight. "You!" he barked, his voice sharp as steel. "Why are you still standing there? Do I pay you to stare at me? Clean something. Or better yet, get out before I have you thrown out." The laughter came again from his side of the table, brittle, forced, echoing through the gilded hall. But this time Emily didn't flinch. The words hit her, but they didn't bury her. They lit the fuse. The Arab investors whispered again, louder now, deliberately cruel. "Look at him. He tears down his own people while pretending to stand tall. A man like this deserves to fall." Emily's hands trembled, her heart pounded like a war drum. Youssef's voice came back again, clear as if he were standing beside her. "Promise me, Emily, if you ever face injustice, don't let silence steal your strength." She had promised. She could almost feel his hand squeezing hers, urging her forward. Richard noticed her stillness, her eyes beginning to lift. He sneered, mistaking it for defiance. "What? Do you think you're better than me now? You're nothing but a maid. Don't you dare look me in the eye." His words hissed across the room, dripping with venom. Emily's gaze rose anyway. Slowly, steadily, she lifted her head. Her eyes locked not on Richard, but on the men across the table. The room shifted. The Arabs stiffened under her stare, a flicker of uncertainty crossing their faces. Richard caught the exchange, his scowl deepening. "What the hell are you staring at?" he barked, his voice raw with anger. Emily's chest rose, the air heavy in her lungs. Her lips parted. For the first time, she wasn't just a maid. She was a voice waiting to break free. The chandelier's light glimmered above as the room fell silent, everyone sensing that something was about to happen, something no one had prepared for. The room trembled with silence, a silence sharper than any insult Richard Kane had thrown. Emily's lips parted. and for the first time, her voice cut through the air, calm, steady, and unmistakably fluent. "You said," she began in flawless Arabic, her tone soft but carrying across the golden boardroom, "that he humiliates his own people while begging you, that he is already desperate, that soon he will kneel." The words hit the table like a thunderclap. The Arab investors froze, their eyes widening in disbelief. The Americans turned, stunned, their smirks wiped clean. And Richard's face drained of color as though the walls themselves had betrayed him. The chandelier lights shimmered above, yet the room felt darker, heavier. Emily lifted her chin, her gaze unwavering. Her voice did not shake. "I heard every word you've whispered tonight, every trap you've set, every betrayal you've woven with the man who should have been here to translate." One of the investors shifted in his seat, clearing his throat, trying to regain composure. "This is absurd," he muttered in English, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. "She's just a maid." But the lie rang hollow. Richard blinked, his mind scrambling. He barked a laugh, brittle and desperate. "This is a joke. You expect me to believe her? A cleaning lady?" He gestured sharply toward her, his voice cracking with disbelief. "You're telling me she understands Arabic?" Emily's gaze flickered to him, then back to the men across the table. "You said," she continued in Arabic, her voice slicing through the pretense, "that the translator betrayed him, that he would sign whatever you wished, blind to the truth." The investors' faces paled, their composure slipping. A ripple of unease spread across them, subtle but undeniable. Richard's hands curled into fists. He wanted to shout, to drown her out, but the room was no longer his. Every eye was on Emily. Every heartbeat seemed to echo her words. "You?" Richard's voice cracked. He jabbed a finger at her. "You're lying. You think a maid has the education, the intelligence to—" But his words fell flat against the truth she had just laid bare. Emily took a step forward, her shoes silent against the marble, but her presence louder than thunder. Her voice deepened, steady, anchored by the memory of Youssef. "I was silent while you mocked me, while you tried to use me to cover your fear. But silence ends tonight." The Arabs shifted again, their eyes darting to one another. The confidence they had carried into the room was breaking, and for the first time Richard Kane's empire of arrogance cracked, not with contracts, not with threats, but with the voice of the woman he had tried to erase. The room held its breath. Power was no longer where it had begun. The boardroom had shifted. The weight of authority, once anchored in Richard Kane's booming voice, now trembled in the hands of a woman who had been invisible just moments ago. Emily's gaze held steady as she spoke again in Arabic, her tone calm but unyielding. "You came here expecting to deceive. You thought no one would hear your whispers. But honor is not built on lies. It is built on truth, and every word you've spoken has been heard." The investors shifted uncomfortably. One of them leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, his voice dripping with disdain. "Who are you to lecture us? You are a maid. You hold no power here." Emily did not flinch. She clasped her trembling hands together, steadying them. "Power does not come from a title or a suit. It comes from integrity. And tonight, I have more of it than any of you at this table." The words cut deeper than any contract. The investors glanced at one another, their composure unraveling piece by piece. Richard, however, erupted. "Enough!" he roared, slamming his hand against the marble. "This is my boardroom. I will not be humiliated by some cleaning woman pretending to be educated." His voice cracked, raw and desperate. "Sit down, shut up, or you'll be out on the streets tonight." But Emily didn't look at him. She didn't need to. His voice no longer commanded the room. She turned back to the Arabs, her eyes steady. "You said my employer would sign whatever you wished, that his translator betrayed him for your gain. You plotted to strip him of dignity while he stood blind. But you forgot one thing. Truth does not stay hidden forever." The air thickened. The investors' smiles faded completely, their silence heavier than gold. One of them shifted uneasily, clearing his throat, but words failed him. Richard tried again, his voice shrill. "She's lying! Don't you see? She's desperate, But the Arabs weren't listening to him anymore. Their eyes were locked on Emily, as though a mirror had been placed in front of them, reflecting the deceit they had crafted. Emily stepped closer to the table now, her presence undeniable. I have mopped these floors, scrubbed these walls, lived in silence while arrogance filled this room. But tonight, you will not use me as a shield, nor will you laugh at me as a distraction. I know your words. I know your plan, and I will not let it stand. For the first time, one of the investors leaned back, his eyes softening. He studied her with something closer to respect than mockery. Another glanced away, the shame of exposure written across his face. Richard, red-faced and trembling, slammed his fist again. This is madness. You think they'll listen to you? You're nothing. Emily's eyes flicked toward him, calm and resolute. If I were nothing, you wouldn't be afraid of my voice. And in that instant, one of the Arabs, a man who had been silent all night, let the corner of his mouth lift into the faintest of smiles. The tide had turned. The tension broke like a dam when one of the Arab investors leaned forward, ignoring Richard completely. His gaze fixed on Emily, his voice calm, deliberate in Arabic. If you understand us, then tell me, why should we trust you? Emily inhaled slowly, her heart pounding but her voice unwavering. Because I have nothing to gain from deceiving you. I have no fortune, no title, no empire to protect. All I have is truth, and truth does not sell itself for profit. The words hung heavy in the golden chamber. For the first time all evening, the investors' expressions shifted, not mocking, not amused, but attentive. They were listening. Richard's chair screeched as he shot to his feet. This is insane, he barked, his face red with fury. You are here for me, not for her. I am Richard Kane. This is my company, my boardroom, my deal. His voice cracked as he pounded his fist against the table, but his desperation only made the silence around him more deafening. His power was slipping like sand through his fingers. Emily turned her head toward him, her eyes calm. Respect is not shouted into existence, Richard. It's earned, and you've mocked everyone who ever stood beside you, including me. The Americans along the wall exchanged nervous glances, unsure if they were witnessing the collapse of their empire or the birth of something new. The Arab investor nodded slowly, folding his hands before him. You speak with dignity, he said in Arabic, far more than the man who calls himself leader here. Richard slammed his palm down again. Don't you dare take her seriously. She cleans floors for a living. She's a nobody. Emily's chest rose as she steadied her breath. She stepped closer to the table, her eyes never leaving the investors. Titles mean nothing without honor. He calls me a nobody, but I am the only one in this room who heard your truth and dared to speak it aloud. The chandelier's crystals caught the light as the weight of her words settled. Then it happened. The silent Arab who had been studying her all night leaned forward, his voice steady, firm. We will sign, but not with Richard Kane. The room erupted, not with noise but with silence so deep it drowned every heartbeat. Richard's mouth fell open, his protest caught in his throat. The Americans froze, their eyes darting between the millionaire CEO and the maid who had just shifted the fate of the meeting. Emily's heart thundered, but she stood tall, her gaze steady. The impossible was happening before her eyes, and Richard Kane, for the first time in his empire of arrogance, was left utterly speechless. The weight of the investor's words still echoed through the boardroom. We will sign, but not with Richard Kane. Richard's face flushed crimson, his jaw quivering as if searching for a retort that refused to come. This is absurd, he stammered, pounding his fist once more. I built this empire. I am the CEO. You will deal with me, or you will get nothing. But the investors did not even glance at him. Their eyes remained on Emily, the maid who stood where no one ever expected her to. One of them spoke again in Arabic, his voice calm and commanding. We will proceed, but she will be the one to mediate, or there is no deal. Emily's breath caught. For a heartbeat, she wondered if she had misheard. Her hands trembled, but she steadied them against her apron. She glanced around the room. Every face was fixed on her. Richard shook his head violently. No, this is my company. You can't. But the Americans, his own associates, were shifting uneasily, their eyes filled with calculation. Billions were at stake, and they could see where power had shifted. The silent Arab, the one who had smiled faintly at her earlier, leaned forward. He gestured toward the documents. Translate. Seal this. Let us end this meeting with dignity. Emily swallowed hard. She stepped forward, her shoes tapping lightly against the marble, each step echoing louder than Richard's desperate protests. She took the contract in her hands. For the first time they weren't shaking. Her voice filled the golden hall as she spoke in Arabic, each word precise, flowing, resonant. She translated the clauses, clarified the terms, bridged the gulf that had nearly torn the empire apart. The investors nodded, their faces settling into composure once more, this time not mocking, but respectful. The pen glided across the paper, sealing the deal that Richard had nearly lost and that Emily had saved. The room erupted, not with applause but with silence, a silence heavy with recognition. Emily stepped back, placing the signed documents gently on the table. Her eyes lifted toward Richard. He stood rigid, his fists trembling, his face pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came. For the man who had filled the room with arrogance, silence was his final defeat. Emily did not gloat. She simply breathed. In her chest, the weight of years of invisibility lifted. She remembered Youssef's voice once more, his words etched into her soul. One day they will try to silence you, don't let them. And tonight, she hadn't. The chandelier's light glittered across the marble, catching in her eyes as she turned, her posture straight, her silence no longer submission but triumph. For the first time, Emily was not just a maid. She was the woman who had turned humiliation into dignity, silence into strength. And in the heart of Manhattan, in a boardroom built for kings of money, it was a cleaning lady's voice that rewrote history. The boardroom lights dimmed in memory, but the lesson lingered brighter than gold. Emily walked into that room as a cleaning lady, invisible to those who measured worth by wealth. She walked out as the voice of truth, her dignity more powerful than any contract signed. Life sometimes hides strength in the most unexpected places. Behind silence, there can be courage. Behind humility, there can be fire. And sometimes the ones the world underestimates are the very ones who carry the power to change everything. Let Emily's story remind us all, dignity cannot be bought, respect cannot be demanded, and every voice matters. If you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, or silenced, know that your story too holds the power to inspire. And if you wish, share a piece of it in the comments, because this community listens. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this heart-touching story. Tell us in the comments which part moved you the most, or share a piece of your own story. Subscribe and turn on the bell to receive more stories that inspire and transform. Leave a like if you believe in the invisible strength of dignity and family. And above all, thank you for being part of this community that believes in stories with soul. And before you go, watch the story I leave here on the left. I'm sure it will also move you and make you reflect.